Hello, folks. I'm Donald Ware, here to introduce Lloyd Pye. About 8 years ago, I was here at the Congress when Lloyd brought us the Starchild skull. And all the directors and long-term researchers took a look at it and gave our views, our gut feelings that this thing was really different. This was real. And somebody needs to do a thorough scientific study of this skull. And Lloyd bravely volunteered to take on that responsibility. He has worked long and hard, and I think done a very good job. Lloyd has spoken here at the Congress several times. He's a fellow Floridian, just recently moved to Pensacola, Florida, about 50 miles east of me. I remember one time he was here, we did something a little different. We had a little board meeting right after all the lectures and before the final Saturday party, and we voted on who we wanted to put on a special 20-minute after-dinner talk. And we all voted on Lloyd. And he chose as his subject the Art Bell helmet. It was kind of an impromptu thing, but he had everybody in the room just splitting their sides with laughter. Please welcome Lloyd Pye.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate it. Now for something completely different. 8 years ago, on a cold Laughlin night, a strange skull was seen, and it didn't look right. There were many in the crowd, and they all could say that the weird skull on stage looked a lot like a gray. I showed that skull with bated breath. I told what I thought, scared half to death. Nobody knew what it might be. Nobody knew, especially me. I did that because I think that would be a perfect introduction and something that Terry Brown would have loved. It was her kind of thing. And I'm sorry, as I know you all are, that she's not here. But I say that, and I open with that, because she was a very, very pivotal person in the story of and the history of the Starchild. It began a little bit different than what Don said. 1 week earlier than the night that I showed it for the first time 8 years ago on that cold Laughlin night. On the 19th of February, 19th of February, 1999, I saw it. Some people from El Paso, Texas, Ray and Melanie Young, had invited me to come see something they had that they thought that I would be interested in and that would warrant my attention if I would come. And so I did. I passed by there, and they showed me these two skulls that they had. And I was impressed because Melanie is a neonatal nurse, or was a neonatal nurse. And she had seen every kind of deformity there was in her years in that job. And she said, "I've never seen anything like this. I think it's too light. I think it's too unusually shaped. It's too symmetrical. It's not deformity as I understand it. But I have a job. My husband has a job. You don't have a job." kind of thing. And would you do it? Would you take it and try to get it tested and find out what it really is? At that time, I was a hominoid researcher, Bigfoot, abominable snowman, things like that, and origins of life. In fact, my book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, Book 1, Human Origins, was about those subjects, and that's what I was out doing. I was promoting that book. I really knew not much about UFOs. except that I had seen one when I was a young man. I believed that they were real, but I did not study it. I was not a scholar in the field at all. I was interested in other things. So in taking on this job, I was starting out very, very far behind the curve. So I told them, I'm on my way to speak at Laughlin this week, and let me take it there and have it analyzed by some people who really know their stuff, and they can tell me, and they may be able to tell you what it is. And so I brought it here, and almost immediately everybody said, that looks like a gray. That looks like it should fit in the head of a gray, pure gray alien. So, I was impressed. People like Don Ware, but particularly Bob and Terry Brown, and particularly Terry. She was, as you all know, a very forceful, strong woman. And she let me know I really needed to work on this. And she also got Mark Bean involved, a gentleman named Mark Bean. And Mark had connections at hospitals in Las Vegas, one particular. So he ran the skulls over to Las Vegas, he and his partner Chris, and had them x-rayed, and the results came back that this was very, very unusual, according to people who did the work. So Mark brought it back, and he said, they really think you have something here. Now, while Mark was in Las Vegas, the 3 days he was in Las Vegas, word was spreading around here like wildfire. And people were coming up to me saying, man, the men in black are going to kill you. Nobody's going to let you keep this skull. You're a dead man walking, son. You better get rid of that thing. And it did. It scared the heck out of me. It did. Because I didn't know any better. And so I told Bob and Terry, we agreed ultimately that I would, as Don told you, I had told at the Congress before, I had told this really funny story about getting this football helmet signed for this Green Bay Packer football helmet signed for Art Bell. And by the way, if you want to see that film, a film of that, you can go to www.lloydpye.com under the humor section, and you can see it. It runs about, I think, 18 minutes now, something like that. And anyway, they wanted me to do something like that again at the next Congress, and that was the Congress. So that Saturday night, instead of telling a funny story, I got up at the banquet and I introduced the audience to the Starchild skull with only the very little bit of knowledge that we had at the time, which was next to nothing in those x-rays. But I also had the background story. And the background story that I was told, and that I told them, and that I'll tell you now for those of you who don't know about it, is that in about 1930, a young woman who was a teenager at the time went to northwestern Mexico with her family. She was of Mexican heritage, and they were going back to visit the old folks at the old village. And when they got there, she was told there were caves and mine tunnels in the area. Don't go there. That's dangerous. Those things are old and crumbly, and they can fall in on you. You can be killed. Don't do it. Well, being a teenager, about 13, 14, 15 years old, the first thing she did was sneak away to go out and do some exploring. And in a mine tunnel, she said, she walked in, she got far enough to see a skeleton lying on the floor of the mine tunnel. And she noticed when she got, because it's dim light now, she got a little closer, she noticed there was something like a hand coming up out of the dirt wrapped around the upper arm of the skeleton lying on the dirt. And she said it was a misshapen hand. So she knelt down to investigate a little closer, and she poked at the dirt and saw that it was loose. And it would be if you're buried in a mine tunnel. There's going to be no rain to compact the soil. It's going to be like it was when you were buried. So with her hand, she scraped it away, and she found another skeleton, full and complete skeleton. This one smaller than the other one, and also misshapen, body misshapen, everything misshapen about it. Young girl, scared, knowing she's doing something wrong. She tries to, she recovers them. Long story, details aren't important. She gets the two skulls and a little piece of the strange one's upper mouth, and she gets them back into the States. She keeps them her whole life. Doesn't really know what she has. She shellacks them early on to protect them. Good thing. Kept a lot of hands and the oil from people's fingers off of them that would handle them, so it was a good thing. And she put them in a box and just kept them her whole life until in the early 90s, she found out that she had a terminal illness and was going to die. And so she asked a friend if he and his wife would keep, like you get rid of a pet, find another home for a pet, if they would keep her skulls, because her husband worked for the government and he was not that comfortable with them. And the other gentleman whom she gave them to, he also worked for the government, but a different branch of it, and he wasn't that keen on it either, but he kept them for 5 years. And that couple gave them to Ray and Melanie Young. And that's in late 1998. And that's when Ray and Melanie contacted me, and early in 99 when I passed through there, they showed it to me, and that's how things kicked off. So that's the background story. I came, I brought it here, I went home to New Orleans, I began to research it. For the first 6 weeks or so, I was feeling like every night I would wake up the next morning dead, because those warnings about the government had really terrified me. But after about 6 weeks, I figured if they hadn't got me by then, they weren't going to get me, because they knew that I had it by then, because I'd been talking about it and been on the radio and done a lot of things to let people know. So all during 99, I was very busy, and I'm going to tell you the story of things that we did and discovered here as we go along. I'm going to start with, if you'll bring up the first slide, so everybody can see what I'm talking about. Do I have to do that? Oh, there you go. All right. There you go. Standard basic Starchild skull. Front view, top, and side view. Now, we're going to talk about it extensively as we go along, but basically, as you see, it doesn't really look human. Now, the front of the face is missing. Understand that. She recovered the skulls whole and complete, tried to sneak them into the village. Long story, rainstorm came, washed them away. She went looking, found. You can get all these details other places. They're not important now, but the face is missing from here down, except for a piece up here, which you'll see later. So that's why it looks so strange in that sense, okay? Now here we see a comparison with a normal human skull, and in fact, this is the human skull that was found with it. So these are the actual real ones. Now, if you notice, the eye sockets are very different, extremely different, and that caught my attention first. My dad was an optometrist. I was keenly aware of eyes and what they were supposed to be like. Normal human eye socket is about 2 inches deep. That's as deep as those first 2 knuckles of my finger there. You stick that in, goes all the way to the end, and it's kind of cone-shaped, and it comes to an end back at the back as you see the optic foramens, where the optic nerve and vessels and things like that come in. With the Starchild, it's about 0.7 inches deep at its deepest point down at the bottom, and that's that little bit right there. Very, very shallow eye sockets. And the eyes are, of course, dropped down. As you see, the optic foramens are down about 1 inch from where they ought to be. So if it did have eyes like we do, they'd be sitting down sort of the middle of the nose rather than up where they belong. And, that would require, as you can imagine, a much longer lid to blink if we assume it had eyes like we had, and they would be bulging off the face a considerable amount, kind of like frog eyes, which is a dangerous thing to have if you're a kid growing up anywhere, really. Notice, if you will, too, this figure to the left. See if I can make this work. You see this area here. In a normal human eye socket, as you see, the cheekbones wrap around and they fold well into the eye socket. If you can see that. You see how the bone folds well in, so that if you were to break it off, and it wouldn't be easy to do because it's so thick and buttressed up on your cheek, but if you could snap it off, it would take out a part of the inside socket. You will notice that the Starchilds, while it was snapped off, that didn't happen. It's got a redesign in there of some kind. And the brow ridge of the skull too is round and thick, and the Starchild's very thin. The bone is very thin. Because the bone of the Starchild, it turns out, is half as thick and weighs half as much as it ought to weigh and as it ought to be. Uniformly. It's as if somehow its genes sent out the message, you don't need to be normal size, you can be half as much and still do it. And so that's how it is, uniformly throughout. Oh, right. I got to learn this. It's my first time to do this. Bear with me, please. I'll get it. I'm not that stupid. Okay, this is a close-up of the eye sockets of the Starchild, and you see them a lot more dramatically in this view. And what it reveals is, again, the little ridges off to the side. See if I can get this. That where they snapped off, where the cheekbones snapped off in that redesign, which is very unusual to start with. But in the surface in here, in the surface of the, see where these little red circles are, those eye sockets, you can look at them as hard as you want with a magnifying glass, and you cannot see any difference in either one of them, and you can't see anything but smooth. And yet, you can take your finger and you can stick it in either of those upper red circles and drag it down like that, and you will feel a little dent where that top red circle is, and as you drag, you'll feel a ridge, and then you'll feel it sink into another little circle. What does that mean? Absolute perfection, absolute symmetry. That is very unusual in human beings. We don't have symmetrical faces. I don't have one. Most of you don't. The people who among us who are considered the most beautiful are considered that because they tend to have the best symmetry in their faces, and even they are not perfect. This is so to consider it a deformity right out of the box based on this is not very likely. Now, here we see a profile shot, and we see that the parts of the bone, the parts of the skull are the same. You have the frontal bone, you have the sphenoids, you have the temporals, you have the parietals. Let me see if I can get this thing to work again. Frontal, sphenoid, okay. Boy, this is, okay, sphenoid, never mind. Maybe I am that stupid. Jeez, I don't know. Maybe I am. Let me try it one more time here. Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm just going to talk about it. So you got the frontal. I might have to do it the old way. Now, this I know how to do. Okay, frontal, sphenoid, temporal, parietal, and occipital in the back. Now, you notice two things. The female, the adult female, had a severe concussion at some point in her life. Cracked like a windshield. You see that? Don't know if it's significant or not, but unusual. Now, you see this bone right here? Medial pterygoid plate. See how much smaller it is? It's half the size here. That bone buttresses your face away from your upper face away from your brain, so that if you catch a shot right in the grill, it doesn't just smash in and crush your skull open on the inside. Those medial pterygoid plates show you that the Starchild has a much smaller lower face. That's one of the first indications. There are others that we will talk about. But also what you see from this shot very clearly is the flattening at the rear of the head of this adult female and the flattening at the Starchild. But it's different. The female shows classic cradle boarding. And what you hear when you take these things to experts and they look at the Starchild, they'll say instantly, without even a second thought, they'll say, oh, well, that's a cradle boarded hydrocephalic. You don't need to worry about that. I heard it, I can't tell you how many times. That's from top experts. Oh, that's a cradle boarded hydrocephalic. Forget about it. Don't worry about it. When in fact, that is a cradle boarded skull. Because cradle boarding is when mothers in primitive cultures take a baby and strap it to a board and they have to tie it up, but they particularly have to tie its head down so that as they're stooping and doing the things that they do, the baby's head is not lolling around and snapping its neck. When you do that, and it's a very common thing, but when you do that, you are flattening the back of that very soft bone as flat as this right here. Flat as the board that it's strapped on. And that's exactly how that head feels right there. Flat. And it's about the size of the palm of my hand. And that's all you get, because the board is going to come up here and it's going to stop at the knot at the back of your head called the inion. I want everybody to reach back there and feel that knot. I know you've always wondered, what's that thing? What does that do? It's very important. It's an attachment point for the big neck muscles that come up the back of your neck that control this motion. It's called the inion, external occipital protuberance, called inion for short. All right? So the board cannot go past that because all of this is neck from here on down. So it always stops right here. It's flat from here to here. That's it. That is cradle boarding. This is not cradle boarding from down here to here, because the inion is right here and the Starchild's inion is flat missing, not there. In fact, there's a dent in the bone where there should be a bump. And it goes right on past, right down to the neck. You start challenging these guys, you start saying, well, now wait a minute. I know you're an expert, you got PhD and PhD plus behind your name and all that, but how do you explain this? There's the door. You know, they do not like being challenged on their own turf. And they don't like being wrong, most of them. Anyway, so the Starchild also is not smooth. It's very convoluted, very natural, the shape of the bone. It was never cradle boarded, not for an instant was it cradle boarded. All right, now here's the rear, and we see the sagittal suture, the lambdoidal suture, and on the left, focus on the Starchild, you see something called islands. They're called wormian bones. Wormian bones, real nasty name. Everybody just calls them islands for short. But what happens is when the bone grows fast on one side or another, they fill in, and they're common. Wormian bones are very common, but because the Starchild has such well-developed ones, it doesn't really look that much like a child. Doesn't really look, in that sense, that much like a child. Now also notice too the missing inion that I just was telling you about. See the difference in the bone? The occipital is curved normally like this. Back of your head is curved going down to your neck where my wrist would be, right? And your cerebellum sits up in here. We'll talk about the cerebellum in a minute. All right? But with the Starchild, whoop, it's just been flattened up. Flattened up. Right down to the neck. Right down to the neck. No inion. So as you see, it's like the occipital bone got stretched up. But actually, they're sort of the same volume, the same area, but just completely reshaped, reconfigured. Now, this is just a shot in a different light to show you the convolutions that are really clear in the Starchild. I hope you can see them. But absolutely, and you'll be able to feel the copy tomorrow or maybe this evening sometime and see for yourself that I'm telling you the way it is. Now, here's the top view. And again, we see the coronal suture, the sagittal suture across the top, the parietals. And what this shows us is the crease or the dent or whatever you want to call it at the top of the Starchild, in the crown of the Starchild's head, as opposed to a human skull. Now, you all know or should know that that's one of the traits that is consistently described by people that see grays, is they say they have like a heart-shaped head with these kind of bulges off to the side and a crease down the middle. And more than anything else, when I brought it here the first time, that's what everybody jumped on. Wow, look at that crease. That's exactly what they're supposed to have. Exactly. So it was pretty exciting. Now notice too, if you would, remember I told you that humans are for the most part slightly asymmetrical? Well, look here. See how this fades down a little bit more than this? This is very normal, but that's how it is. Notice how symmetrical. This thing is well put together. I mean, well put together compared to us. Here's a view of the underside. Now, we're going to talk about the underside in some other slides, but what I want you to notice here, the amazingly good teeth of the adult female. Not a cavity. They're worn flat from eating a grit-filled diet like horse's teeth, but man, she had good teeth, like she had braces. And also notice this, the zygomatic arch. That's the cheekbone. This one's missing, but this one is complete. Now I can take 2 of my fingers and shove them up here. Just easy fit, 2 fingers right through here. This is where your chewing muscles go up and wrap and spread out around your head. We'll talk about that in a minute too. This is the foramen magnum, where the necks come in. We're going to talk about this as well. But the teeth thing I wanted to just mention in passing, a man named Dr. Weston Price of San Diego, you can look this up, Weston Price. He did research in the early part of the last century to find out that in primitive tribes, they don't have cavities. Their teeth come in like they all had braces, and their teeth are perfect. Why? Processed foods. They eat no processed foods. No sugars, no jams, no jellies, and no processed foods. And if you did that, if we did that, which we can't do, it's not the way we live, but just in passing, he went out to these primitive tribes expecting to find just all their teeth rotting out. He couldn't find a cavity. 1 tooth in 1,000 might have a cavity, and generally it had healed over itself. Just a little sidelight I like to throw in because I think it's amazing. Anyway, let me get to the next one. All right, here we see the zygomatic arches again drawn in of the adult female. Look at the Starchilds. See how much tinier. Tiny, tiny little face. Again, 2 fingers up through here, you get a couple of soda straws, a couple of straws up through there. That's how tight and small and narrow its face is going to be, or would have been. Now, these holes you're looking at here, we'll talk about this in a minute. This is a bone called the basilar plate, or basilar part rather, basilar part. And it seals in a person's skull at about 20 to 25. Starchild's is missing. So that's an argument for it being under that age, that it's gone because it would have been lost in the tumbling of the flood. But if you were to put it in, these 2 things are equal. Equal. That's important. Their foramen magnum openings are the same. Now here we see a good look at the base of the Starchild's skull. And what we see is that this is the base of its broken off zygomatic arches. They're little points of what's left. Oh, if I hit anybody in the eyes with this, I'm sorry. The occipital condyle are these brace points here that the neck works on, the skull articulates on the occipital condyles. Mastoid processes are right here. That's just the bone behind your ear, mastoid process. The ear canal and the inner ears right here. And then the missing basilar part if it was there, just to show you what that would look like. Now here we look at the neck size comparison. Look at this. We see that in the adult female, all this area is going to be covered by neck. And we see the basilar part we were just talking about. Look at the difference with the Starchild. It's about half. In volume, that's about half. And of course, you have a different shape as well. That is very unusual. Very unusual. Here we look at more with the neck attachments, and we see that we have with the Starchild the missing inion up here, and you see these dents right here? That's where the muscles attach for it. About 1 inch from its foramen. Its neck is going to be very much smaller. And you see that this is the human with its inion and its fossa going right up in there, much bigger, and they're wrapping on both sides of it because that's where those muscles come. They attach right up on it, and this is the copy of this with it. So you see the difference. This is the balance points. Now this is really interesting because the brain in here in this skull is normal for about a 5-foot tall person, 1,200 cubic centimeters. Keep that number in mind, 1,200 cubic centimeters. This is a small person. Not unusual for people in Mexico, even to this day, 5 feet tall. So 1,200 cubic centimeters. Now, as most of us sitting in this room have the average, which is 1,400 cubic centimeters. So we have 200 cubic centimeters more of brain than this skull right here. Now, the Starchild skull is exactly the same size as this skull. Exactly. About 15 centimeters by 15 centimeters by 15 centimeters. If this was 7 inches long right here, they would both fit in that box equally. They are the same in their configuration. But the Starchild's brain is, guess what? 1,600 cubic centimeters. So you're looking at a 400 cubic centimeter differential here. And it's like, where does it go? How do you put that much more brain in it? Well, we're going to see that it has no sinuses. It has those very shallow eye sockets. And it's half as thick all around, but it still doesn't seem like enough. And we really don't know. It's a mystery still. It's wall-to-wall brain in there. We do know that much. Very, very interesting. But also, the neck, this balance point is on the neck. All of us, our balance point, as you see, is rear of center. Because why? We have all this face out here, this extra. We have deep eye sockets. We have sinuses in there. We have nasal passage. We're hollow up here. So you have to move, like on a seesaw, you have to move the balance point back. But with the Starchild, the balance point got moved forward to balance exactly as much brain here, pretty much, as you have here. No sinuses, shallow eye sockets, brain. Its neck moved forward a full inch somehow. Now, if that's deformity, what are the odds? I had a friend who taught junior high, and he was teaching some kids about thermoses. And he said, you know, kids, if a thermos, because of its insulating qualities, if you put hot liquid into a thermos, it will keep it hot. If you put cold liquid into that same thermos, it will keep it cold. And a hand shot up in the back of the room, and a little boy said, Mr. Russell, how do it know? How do it know? Well, that's what I ask anybody. How do it know? How did it know to fix itself so that it would balance perfectly over its balance point like a weird lopsided looking golf ball on a golf tee? It's not even close to a human neck, and yet it functioned for quite some time in life. Very, very unusual. Now here we have something different. Pressure on the cerebellums that we talked about, the pressure lines. Now remember, in the curve of your occipital bone sits your cerebellum. Now, the cerebellum is an important piece of hardware in your head. It is separate from all the rest of your brain, the cerebrum. It makes up only 10% of your brain's volume, but it has 80% of the active neurons in your brain are there. The eye, the optic nerve of the eye, the miracle of the eye, only has about 1 million active neurons. The cerebellum has 200 million. It controls everything. It's your hard drive. And it can't be damaged. So you got this nice thick bone down here. You got these nice thick muscles protecting it, laid over it. It's well cared for good reason. But as we see in the Starchild, something's happened. Instead of this vertical line down in a human pressing down right here, neck hole being right here, you have this coming down, but you also have all this extra added weight of this extra brain pressing down this way, in effect trying to slide that cerebellum out of the foramen opening hole. And don't kid yourself. It's well known that in true hydrocephaly, when you have water on the brain and that pressure is up there and increasing, one of the first things to go in an infant is that foramen magnum begins to open up. And brain squeezes down and out. And that's part of how you die from that. Okay? Do you understand? Somehow the Starchild took all this pressure, pressing down right here, and yet in its soft bones when it was an infant, they never moved. How does that happen? The brain specialist that pointed this all out to me, he says, well, either it has a brain completely different than what we have, or it's just a walking miracle. How do it know? You know, it's just amazing. Amazing that you have this many things unusual about this skull physiologically, and yet it still functioned. Incredible. Chewing muscles. This is normal wrap of chewing muscles around your head. Anybody close enough to see mine? They go way up here. It's surprising how high they go. Starchilds are down around here. Now, what they mean is this is normal size face and jaw. They attach to the jaw, they come up through here, and they spread out and they connect all through here. With the Starchild, through here, what is it telling us? Along with the pterygoidal plates, its face is very, very small. So, what went down first? Did its face go small and so this went small, or did this go small and the face had to be small? How do it know? How do we know? We don't know. We just know that it's there. This is a comparison of the exterior surfaces up close, taken with a close-up view of it, and you see the shine of the shellac that I told you about. Normal skulls have pores, like your skin has pores, really, basically little pits kind of things. Starchild has Zippo. Why? If you're a deformity, you're still human. You're still going to have mostly human traits, are you not? This seems like an odd one to be erased. Okay, remember I told you the maxilla, the front of the mouth? This is it. This is the maxilla piece right here that was recovered. It's from the middle front of the upper jaw around. And as you see, it still had 2 teeth in it. It lost the first 3, but it still had these 2 in it. Now, when we took the skull and that little piece to Las Vegas, when Mark Bean did that first week, he came back with the x-rays, and we'll see them later, but this one, it showed, as it will, you'll see teeth up in here. And the people in Las Vegas said, well, it's a child. It's a child. And so Terry, I think it was Terry Brown that came up with the idea you ought to call it the Starchild. Anyway, we thought it was. I mean, how could it not be? If you got teeth down and teeth up and look like they're coming down, got to be a child. Anyway, we took this piece, and even though we didn't do a very good job with it, we took it to a dental lab, and he said, could you take this and kind of build a face and let us see what it might have looked like? Well, all they had to work with was human templates. I said, we'll do the best we can, but as you see, this doesn't look, like it should at all. It's way too big, but still, it makes for kind of an interesting look there. Give you a little sense of what a lower face might have looked on it, how it might have looked. Now, this is that piece of maxilla off on its own, and as you see, this shows it had a nasal passage, meaning it breathed. It had a nose like we have a nose, but it breathed. And you see here, this, by the way, is purple stuff. When they casted it to make that mold that that thing that you just saw, some of this stuff came out and they said, we're going to have to pick it out. I said, don't worry about it. Just let it stay because I want to keep it as well preserved as I can and keep it from being contaminated. And, I knew we'd use it later. But these are the 2 teeth. Now, do those look like baby teeth to you? Those are not cavities. Those are stains. Just staining on the teeth. They're not cavities. But they're pretty robust teeth for baby teeth. And yet, you still, as you'll see, you've got teeth up there. Notice it's 1 inch long. And this is a flat palate. This is the size of a newborn. Very, very small little face. And yet living at least till 5 or 6 if it is a deformity that would have been, having teeth up there and losing teeth at the time. This is a close-up of the adult female's teeth and a close-up of the Starchild molar that's left after testing. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, you see that this is sheared off sort of flat, again, like a horse teeth, and that's the staining again. It's not cavities, it's just staining. Flattened off from that grit-heavy diet. But here you see chipped off pieces of enamel, ground down. You see these lines here. This is called crazing. A lot of stress on the tooth, or you can get that sometimes in postmortem contraction, but still, this is a well-worn tooth. Baby teeth, it doesn't really fit with what you would think a baby tooth would look like, but nonetheless, there it was. Now, this shows the x-ray that we got, the original one, in Las Vegas in February of '99, and this is where we saw this up here, and they said, well, it's got to be a child, and this is when both of the teeth were still there. Later, and we'll talk about it, we gave up this tooth for DNA testing in Canada, and now this is what we're left with, and these photographs, these x-rays were taken in London when I was in London in 2004, and I met my lovely new wife, Amy, who some of you have seen walking around, and this was part of that process. And this is a tooth ready to come down, 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 down. So, again, the argument being it's a child ready to come down. However, Amy, she was working her way through law school in Australia when I met her as a dental technician. And she took a look at that and she said, you know, baby teeth don't have roots like that when they're ready to fall out. They grow fast, they have little roots. And you think about it with your kids and your grandkids, when they get those loose teeth and they come out, they don't have roots, do they? As the other tooth is coming down, it dissolves the roots. Look at the roots on that tooth. Ain't no dissolving there. And the guys that took it out at the lab in Canada, they said, man, it was hard to get that tooth out of there. Really hard. I said, okay, at the time, that didn't make any sense to me, but it will, and you will hear why. Now, these are the x-rays that Mark Bean took in Las Vegas in '99, and this is why you see another reason we got excited. Look at the human. This is normal. Eye sockets, frontal sinuses. See them colored here, frontal sinuses. Not so much as a whisper in the Starchild, not so much as a vestigial bud. They don't exist. It doesn't have them. But look at this weird, strange cast to the eye socket. Isn't that strange? So we knew early on in the first week we were dealing with something very unusual. Now here we see a profile shot, and we see a real good shot of the cradle boarding here and of the extensive flattening of the Starchild's head, and we see the convolutions there very clearly. But we also see the veins, the imprints of the veins on the skull, of the veins on the brain pressing into the soft bone of the skull and leaving a track. And we see that this individual did not have water on the brain, nor did the Starchild. You see the expansion, though, in the parietal lobe. So the Starchild did not have water on the brain. Not hydrocephalic in that sense, however, you can have water in the brain. And so whenever I would point that out to people, they'd say, oh, well, it was just water in the brain. Water in the brain. No. Because why? You remember the dent on the top of the head? It doesn't matter if the pressure is coming from on the brain or in the brain, something's pushing up and there will be no dent. Not in soft bone, it's going to all push out. You understand? Unless the sutures are fused prematurely, and sometimes they are, and when they are, especially when the sagittal suture, the one that we're talking about in back up here, is fused, you get something called Crouzon's disease. And you've all seen someone with Crouzon's disease probably. It's those people where their face grows out and their eyes turn out to the side, and they have very wide in here and their eyes are sort of off to the side. You don't see it as much. I had one in my hometown in Louisiana when I was a kid, but they can fix them now very well and you don't see them as much. But if you're of a certain age, you saw Crouzon's disease. And that's what it comes from. The premature closing of sutures. Starchild did not have that. We'll see that in a minute too. Now, this is a look at the foramen magnums of the adult female and the Starchild, and here you see again, and really there's nothing much to show except you see the convolutions here really well, and you see that again, there was no outward push at all from the foramen magnum holes of the brain pushing down, even though you had all that extra push, extra weight, extra volume, pushing at a very steep angle with nothing to stop it. How did it stop? How did that not happen? Okay, next thing we did when I left here, I went home to New Orleans, and as soon as I could, I arranged a CAT scan. And the CAT scan is, you know, it's a digital knife that just slices through, and we start here and we work through to here. So here's the first little piece right here, and it's slice, and you see these, and I was just telling you about the sutures. If you have, and that's what they were looking for, any prematurely fused suture. They didn't look like it from externally, but sometimes you can't tell looking externally. So we have to do the CAT scan. And as you see, they stay open right on through, right on through, right on through. And the doctor who was doing it, he said, boy, that's absolutely healthy, not a problem, no fusion anywhere. But he also said, holy moly, look at those inner ears. Those things must be twice as big as they should be. This is a pediatric surgeon, specialist, 40 years practice, saying, boy, those inner ears must be twice as big as they should be. What's that about? Well, if you've got a head, a big old head, that's sitting on a little bitty skinny neck, and you got to balance it just right, maybe you do need bigger inner ears because that's your balance mechanism. How do it know? How do it know to grow that? Okay, now, I'm going to go back. I want to go back because I want to give you some build up to that right there. At this point where we are right now, we know an awful lot, as you can tell, about the physiology of this thing, and we know how weird it is. But specialists, scientists can always say, it doesn't matter. And they did. They said this to me. I don't care how many things you bring. I don't care if you bring 1,000 anomalies to me in one skull, because I know that when it comes to deformity, anything is possible. Absolutely anything. We have made the playing field so wide in deformity that you can't bring us anything we haven't either seen before or can't account for. You know, try to imagine how frustrating that was to constantly hear that. Occam's razor. Occam's razor. In any situation where you don't know what's going on, go for the simplest answer. This is what specialists always say. You go for the simplest answer. Not the logical answer, the simplest answer. And their definition of a simple answer is simple. It makes it easy on us. It makes it easy on us. Whatever the answer is, it makes it easy on us so that we don't have to deal with a problem we can't deal with. Occam's razor lets us say that's it. So that's where we were. We were stuck. There was only one thing, and now we're going to talk about this for most of the rest of the way for a while. There's only one thing that really counts when it comes to this kind of thing, and that is DNA. DNA is the weapon of choice of scientists. It's their tool. You've heard of running someone through with their own sword, hoisting someone on their own petard. That is what DNA will do. DNA they can't argue with. It's their thing. You got it? So, I knew that we needed DNA. So I started looking, and at the time, now I failed to mention up to now, but we had already had, at this point, a carbon-14 dating done, and we'd found out that the skulls were 900 years old. 900 years old, plus or minus 40 years. That's ancient. Now, when you do DNA, anything up to 50 years, pretty easy to recover. After 50 years, it's considered ancient, pretty hard to recover because of contamination and degradation and a number of other things. So finding a lab that could do a DNA analysis of a skull 900 years old was at that time not easy. There were only about a half a dozen in the world that did it, and I couldn't find one. But I did find a lab in Vancouver, British Columbia, called the Bowl Lab, and they were a forensic lab, not an ancient DNA lab, forensic, 50 or earlier, not 50 or beyond. But they said, what we can do for you maybe is we can tell you if it's worth your time and trouble and effort to pursue finding the DNA of these skulls at a much more expensive ancient DNA lab. For only a few $1,000s, we can tell you if its DNA is even there, because it may not be. The Kennewick man, you know the famous Kennewick man, its bones had laid out and bleached in the sun and been drowned by water, and its DNA was absolutely gone, totally degraded, mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA gone. So it wasn't impossible that that was the case with our skulls. However, as they said, if your skulls were buried in a mine tunnel, then they should be pretty well preserved, because essentially they've been held in a climate-controlled storage locker for 900 years. They ought to be really well preserved. So I said, okay, we'll do your test. And we did that test. We let them do it, and they took one of the teeth, because teeth are the best preservers of DNA, gave them the molar, hated to do it because you can tell so much about something from its teeth, but didn't really have any choice. Bowl Lab, Bureau of Legal Dentistry, boy, they wanted to dig into that tooth. And so they took part of the human tooth, a part of the neck, occipital condyle. Anyway, they took the human's DNA, came up, her nuclear DNA, they didn't test for mitochondrial DNA, that's not what they did, nuclear DNA, came up perfectly. No problem, human being. Well, we knew that. Starchild didn't come up the first time, had a contamination. Didn't come up the second time, had another contamination. Third time it came up, and this is what the result was. After the customary number of PCR cycles, 28, there was a very weak 200 picograms gender profile from the second bone sample taken from the child's mastoid process. Only one locus showed a profile, amylogenin. The result is XY, which tells us two significant things. First, the child was male. Second, the DNA is human. Now, 1,000 picograms is usually the minimum threshold at which a reliable reading for DNA can be made. With the tooth, they contaminated it, so we lost that. So they took the mastoid process piece back here and said that they got a reading 200 picograms, 1/5 of what was normal, and they say it's a human and it's a male. And as we say down home, we were screwed, blued, and tattooed. That was it. Paid all this money, I'd collected all this money, I had to go on the radio and tell everybody this is, but every time I did, I would say, but 200 picograms is not much to count this thing on, but everybody just took it and ran with it, and I had no choice, and so everybody, and probably many people sitting in this room, had the impression before seeing me here today that, wait, wasn't that thing proved to be human? I bet you, give me a show of hands. I can't see it, but I bet you some of you will remember that, thinking that it's been proved as human. No matter what I said, it cut no slack at all about how iffy this analysis was from a lab not really equipped to do it. Okay? So that was in November of 1999. So we've covered my first year with it pretty much now. Found out all that information. For 2000, for 2001, for 2002, I didn't do squat with it. I didn't get anything done. I couldn't get anybody to help. I couldn't get anybody interested. No money, no nothing. I'm running up credit card bills you would not believe, trying to get it. People, I just couldn't do it. I was inadequate to that job, whatever that job was. And so I sent out an email in the latter part of 2002 saying, I can't do this anymore. I'm probably never going to dig myself out of the financial hole I'm in right now, and I can't do it anymore. Adios, amigos. Sorry, somebody else is going to have to do it. A lady from England named Belinda McKenzie wrote me back, and she said, I've just come into some money, and I've been following you and what you're trying to do. What do you want? What do you need, and what will it cost? And I said, I need a DNA test at a lab dedicated to recovering ancient DNA, and it'll cost X amount of dollars, and this is what we need. And a few weeks later, she checked me out, of course, you know, and I had to fill out a lot of forms and papers and things to prove what I was saying, but I did, and the check arrived, and I was back in business in 2003. So in 2003, I began hunting for a lab, and I found a new lab just coming online of ancient DNA guys, young guys, Trace Genetics at the University of California at Davis. They've since moved on to another place in Hayward, I think it is, near San Francisco. But anyway, point is, they said, we'll do it. We will do it, and we can do it. We've got the facilities, we'll do it. 3 years now down the line, 2003, middle of 2003, I'm excited. Boy, I go to El Paso, I pick up the skulls, take them to the University of California at Davis, deliver them to these guys, and we're ready to go. Set up cameras to film it, really going to do it upright, because if we get a positive result, the first thing the critics are going to say is, well, you did it wrong. You did something wrong. You did something stupid. You're an idiot. You couldn't possibly have done this right, So we filmed it and did everything we could, and so we're ready. We're there. We got the skulls down, and Jason, the geneticist, cut a window out of the parietal, because the theory was that nothing could have touched up there, and they'd already cut one window out in Canada. So anyway, that's what we did. We're going to cut a window out of both parietals, the adult female and the Starchild. A Dremel blade, you know what that is? It looks kind of like a flashlight with a rotary thing about 1 inch, 1¼ inches round, and spinning, woo, like that. So he goes, woo, woo, and he does 4 of those, and he cuts out a square bone out of the head of the adult, falls in, out the neck hole, everything's fine. You can smell burning collagen. And there's powder, bone powder, kind of kicked up into the air as he cuts the adult female. Now that smell you all know is the smell of the dentist. When they're drilling your teeth, that's collagen burning, not enamel, that's collagen burning. So it's like, ooh, that was kind of bad, not too bad. Starchild, comes Starchild's turn. He takes the Dremel blade and he puts it down and he goes, like that, and he goes, whoop, and it bounces right up. And he looks at the other guy, and he puts it down and goes, boop, bounces right up. So it's like, okay. And it went, woo, and boy, bone and powder just flew. The smell was awful, filled the room. It was unreal. Unreal. We had goggles on and everything. A piece of it flew over and hit me in my goggle, but 4 cuts of that, and man, we're opening the windows, we're opening the doors. It's horrible. And he says, man, we've never seen anything like this. It's at least 2 or 3 times as hard as normal human bone. It's half as thick. 2 or 3 times as hard. And stink to high heaven. So it's got to have extra collagen in there, and we found out later that it did. It's packed with collagen. Okay? Very durable. Now, they went to work doing the DNA testing. Now, let's talk about DNA testing. This is mitochondrial DNA of the adult and the Starchild. Okay? Now, when you do DNA testing, you have in the cell, you have the nucleus, and you have the material floating outside the nucleus. Outside the nucleus are little bitty chips of about 16,000 base pairs. Keep this term in mind, about 16,000 base pairs floating around in little bitty chips outside the nucleus in the cytoplasm. Inside the cell, you have the nucleus, and in the nucleus is all of the chromosomal package of the being from both its mother and its father. Okay? We always assumed that the Starchild was a hybrid. because of you probably know about the program of the aliens coming down, the star beings, and making women pregnant, and we also know that that goes on supposedly today. So we assumed it was a hybrid. If it's a hybrid between a human and a gray or an anything that shouldn't normally sexually match up with that, what do you have to do? You got to change one or the other, the egg or the sperm. What are you going to change? The egg. Why? It's so much bigger. So much easier to change. Our doctors fool with eggs all the time. You can do an egg, you can't do a sperm. So we assume the mother would be human. So we assume the Starchild's DNA, its mitochondrial DNA, which comes down only from the mother, would be human. We assume that. Well, sure enough, when Jason did the work, they found that the adult female's mitochondrial DNA came up nice and clear in the gels. Now let me explain these to you. This is Jason's nuclear DNA right here. They always put what's called a control in. He always puts his own. That's his there too. And these things here are called primer-dimer. What primer-dimer is it just shows you that the gel sheet is working. This shows you the gel sheet is working. You don't want to be getting a bad read on a bad gel sheet. Okay? This shows right here, these 4 bright lit up areas show that the adult human is from what's called haplogroup A. Haplogroup A, and it's a very common type of Mesoamerican, haplogroup A. The Starchild's mother, understand we're looking at the adult female's mother here. We're looking at the Starchild's mother. Her mitochondrial DNA is these 4 right here. And this shows haplogroup C. A not as common as A, but not as rare as X. Okay? So, they're not related. Arm on the bone, hand on the arm in the mind tunnel, we thought that probably was a mother and child. For the longest time we thought that, until this came back and showed us not so. She was either a caretaker, close friend, lover, something, but she was willing to lay down and die because that scene as it's described can only be that the Starchild died. She, for some reason, schlepped it up to the mine tunnel, apparently to hide from somebody for some reason, buried it, and then she fixed it so that its hand was sticking up out of the dirt, and then she laid down beside it, wrapped it around her arm, and took poison, cut her wrist, cut her throat, did something. Death and suicide is what that scenario indicates, but not mother and child. Okay, now we're ready for the big hit. Now I want you to know, you people are seeing these gel sheets for the first time, and I'm going to be on Coast to Coast Monday night, and we're not putting them on the website, the Starchild website, until that night, so that everybody in the Coast to Coast audience can see it for the first time. It's a special thing, because I've just got these. They don't give these up very lightly. They give up depictions, but not the real things. Copies of them. But I sweet talked them because I was doing a book that we'll talk about later as well. All right. So now it's time for the money shot. The nuclear DNA. And they were pretty confident. They said, boy, they're coming up so clear on the gels here. It's what we thought. There doesn't look to be much degradation. They probably were found in the mine tunnels, like she said, in the mine tunnel. We're excited. We are excited. Well, the adult female, her nuclear DNA came up just fine first time, and this is Jason's here as the control. But look at the Starchild. Actually 0 for 7 because he did 1 first and there was a little contamination on it, so they did it 6 times more. Zippo, that's primer-dimer. 0, nothing. Nothing. Now, what does that tell you? Its dad, its father, is the one that's messing this up. Because we know from the mitochondrial DNA, its mother is human. So if this being was the product of a human mother and a human father, we would see something here. but we see nothing in 6 attempts. And that was enough for them to say, we're not going to get a recovery here. 203, July of 203. Well, what do we have here? He says, well, you really don't have anything, because we have to say, using Occam's razor, the simplest solution is not the logical solution. The logical answer, obviously, is that what I said, the Starchild's father is not really human. But Occam's razor said the simplest answer is required by them, and the simplest answer is it's degraded in some weird way that we can't account for. We've never seen, we don't understand, we don't know, but this has to be degradation. It cannot be, ipso facto, under the rules that we live under at the moment, that this is an alien DNA. But it is. It is. I know it is. They know it is. Now you know it is. It is. It means the father is not entirely human. If it was human, you'd see something there. The mitochondrial DNA came up fine. In a mine tunnel, well preserved. It ought to be there. It isn't. So I said, well, what can I do? And they said, well, in our field, we're moving ahead pretty rapidly. In 3 to 5 years, and Bob, when he said 3 to 5 years, my head just went, oh, no. 3 to 5 years? Yeah, in 3 to 5 years, there's going to be a technology breakthrough that will probably increase the quality of the primers so that we can tell you a lot more about it. Primers, let's talk about that for a minute. How are these things recovered? With primers. They're like keys, chemical keys that fit in chemical locks. And they create human-only primers, like you can create a primer for a gorilla, for a chimp, for anything. Why? You look at stretches of its DNA, and you just build little things that will match, and they're called primers, and then you go into any unknown sample and you put it in there, and if it matches up, if the key finds the lock, it fits, it matches in there, and it makes these things right here, and they can see, so they know what they're dealing with. They said the human-only primers of today do not work here, but the human-only primers of 3 to 5 years might. And that's your only hope. So in the meantime, what can you do? In the meantime, what can I do? And they said, get that bone tested. Because boy, it is so hard and it's so unusual, get the bone tested. So I told Belinda, who was still funding things at that time, I said, here's the deal. She said, move over here to London, move into my house. We have a spare room here you can have, and we'll do the work over here because England is more open than your scientists are. And we found that to be true. So, except for Richard Dawkins. Darwin's right way. Except for Richard Dawkins. Forget him. But everybody else, a lot more open. So anyway, we took the bone over and we started testing it under a scanning electron microscope. And this is what we saw. That is the powder. Remember the powder from the cutting of the Dremel? This is Starchild bone. That's powder in the cancellous holes. What are the cancellous holes? In bone, you have the cortical layer here and here. It's kind of like a sandwich. And in here, you have the cancellous holes, and that's where the marrow goes. Okay? But as we looked at it under the scanning electron microscope, we saw this stuff, and that didn't belong. What is that? So we increased the focus a little bit, and we found this sort of stuff. This is this right here expanded. This is this area. Two completely different kind of fibers coming out of the bone, and as you can see from this one here, this is caught in this thin one here, it comes up here, but somehow it's wrapped around this thicker one here. It's crazy. And the thin one here, more hair-like fibers. Never seen before in any bone, human or otherwise. Touchdown! Except for the fact that Occam's razor says, it's just a fluke. We don't have to explain it. It's just another fluke. Another of your many flukes. Forget about it. Very discouraging. Now check this. I'm just going to run through some. This is where the Dremel blade was cutting through and was making a smooth cut hit here, and he was coming to the edge and he kind of let off the speed. we didn't know this. We're talking something the size of my little fingernail. We're talking small here, folks. Microscopically small. But that was there, and we found it looking at it with the scanning electron microscope. And we call it the claw because you see it's kind of like the bone is curled back kind of like a claw. I hope you can see it as clearly as I can see it here. And up close look at it, you see, look at those fibers stuck to it. And you see up at the top here, we call this the button up here, and these are all stringing off of it. And you see the button here, and you see yet another type up here. Look at the bottom, it's kind of flaring out. It's not just one type of fiber, several. Now, the first thought when we saw this, the specialist who was doing it said, you know, geez, that's got to be some kind of growth or something. That can't be coming out of the bone because there's no such thing. There's no such thing. So we immediately took it to mycologists, and they said, you know, there's 30,000 things it could be, but we don't think it's any of them, just looking at it. So it looks like fibers. And what's so special about them is they're very, very durable because why? The Dremel blade didn't cut them. It didn't tear them off like it should have or would have if they were anything normal. Here you see a piece in it that was somehow picked up and snagged down in this stuff, but as you see, it's just completely loose here out at the tip. And you see it's just shredded. Shredded. Imagine how durable that is. Remember? Something has to explain that. A lot of collagen, yes, but these fibers are there, never seen before in any bone of any kind. Now we took another approach to another way of doing it, and we cut it with a diamond blade rather than the standard Dremel blade. We took a diamond-coated thing to get a much cleaner cut and make much less powder into the cancellous hole so it'd make it easier to work with. And we did that, and we see the Starchild there. Now we did it with the human too. We took the human bone, since we had that. We only had the Starchild for the black and white shots, but now we're using both to compare the human and the Starchild. And as you see, cortical layer, and you see this is kind of layered in here, whereas the human has a kind of a poured concrete look about it. It's different. And this layering is mostly collagen. It's like a program was run on the Starchild and said, take all the collagen that you'd have here and just squeeze it down half as thick, but keep the same amount. It's like that. This is the polished surfaces of the human bone. Now, this is absolutely normal. What they do is they take the edges and they polish them down with lapidary tools, the tools with which you make jewelry, very, very carefully. So you're not going to get any of that powder blowing into the cancellous holes, and you can look and see what you have. And when you do that, you get a look of something like alabaster. It looks really nice. It's pretty, actually. Alabaster. And in the cancellous holes, notice, you can eat out of those things. They are so clean. Why? Because when you die, and this is perhaps indelicate at this moment, but nonetheless, when you die, it's important, you have bacteria in your body that decompose you, take you down to your elements if left out in nature to do that. And part of it is a bacteria that scours your cancellous holes to that degree, and that is what you should see. Perfectly normal. With the Starchild, however, looks milky, doesn't it? It has kind of a milky look. It doesn't really look like alabaster. And guess what else? See that little arrow? Notice anything odd in there? It's a little tiny, tiny red speck. And we thought, well, it must be a mistake of some kind. But then when we saw this piece, the other end of that edge that had been so well polished, look at that. A bunch of pieces of that red stuff. Again, touchdown. Never seen before in any bone of any kind at that age. And it's red. If it was, still marrow in there, it'd be black if it was still there, but it wouldn't be there. Nothing should be there. And yet this reddish stuff, this residue, that's all we call it, is red residue, we don't know what it is there. And you still have, of course, the layering effect. You see there very clearly. Here we have a close-up of the reddish residue that we were just looking at. See how much of it there is? No idea what it is. Now, you say, well, gee, why didn't you find out? Why didn't you find out what the fibers are and all this stuff? You are talking so expensive because there are no protocols to recover this stuff. Never been seen before, no tools, no procedures, no nothing. All that would have to be invented and created and then applied, and we just don't have that kind of money. But even if we did, what would the answer be from the scientists when we presented them with the results? Well, so what? So what? Just another freak of nature. Freak of nature. All that's going to count with these guys is DNA. They can explain everything else away. Very, very frustrating. Here you see a backlit area because we really now, when we knew it was there, really wanted to get a good look at it and backlit it up, and you see how much of it there is. Isn't it cool? Isn't it pretty? But we're just stuck here with nothing to do except just know what we have. And I've known it since 2003, and you haven't heard me do anything about it because I couldn't. I couldn't prove it. I couldn't move forward. Now, what we're left with is the skulls with these. This is where we are now. This is what's the missing part, so I don't bring those out. What I have here is and we'll show you later this evening, and then all day tomorrow we'll be in the, Amy and I will be in the room next door with the two skulls, and you can come by, you can look at them, you can hold them carefully over the bubble wrap and lift them and weigh, compare their weights and all that. They're exact in every way that we could make them. But that's what the originals are left with. The condyles are gone. She's a lot less damaged because every time they test her, she comes right up because her DNA is very well preserved. But the Starchild has suffered some damage, as you see. Its condyles are gone. Its mastoid is gone. This is a window cut out and repaired in bold. This is the other window that was cut out for the trace genetics. This is the one Jason did. Remember that one? That's that one. And we've now had to widen this one to take the pieces that we did used in London to do the fibers and the reddish residue. But you see how it is. And this is a comparison between the copy that you will see and the original, the Starchild skull, so you can see how absolutely good it is. It's done by something called stereolithographic reproduction, and it's just an amazing process. So here we are. Where do we where does this leave us? Where are we now? We think it's a human-alien hybrid. That's what we think. And we base it on, one of the things we do is this Visual Guide to Alien Beings by David Chase. And David talked to a lot of people, and he made collective groupings of what the stories that he was told. And I didn't even know about these. You probably do. The little blue men, I'd never heard of them. Little grays, tall grays, hybrids. We think the Starchild is probably one of these. The Lyrans, the Pleiadians, Anunnaki, whatever. And then he's got a reptilian draped in a robe, and he left the insectoids completely out. And I said, David, why'd you leave the insectoids out? Why'd you put the reptilian in the robe? He says, geez, man, I didn't want to scare people. I wanted to sell the book. I didn't want to scare them off. But inside, of course, there are plenty of them. But anyway, this is the one we think it is, probably. Something like that. This is an amazing story. During the process of this, a woman named Josie Galanti contacted me, and she said, I was abducted, I was made pregnant, I knew I was pregnant, I went and I had a sonar scan, and in my 4th month they came and took it from me. And then 5 years later I was taken on board and I was shown a child, and they said he's your 5-year-old son and you can take some time and bond with him, which I did. And she told me how he looked and everything. She said, but I'm an artist and I drew him back in 1996. I didn't lay eyes on the thing till 1999 on the Starchild, but look, pretty cool, huh? This is a profile of her son that she did. Look at that. What are the odds? What are the odds? Now, another real interesting thing is Wendell Stevens. You all know Wendell. Wendell let me use this. And you may have seen this bust before. This was a man in 1978, I think Wendell told me. In 78, he saw aliens and he had good remembrance of them, and they commissioned sculptors to make it. And they shipped it back and forth to him 7 or 8 times until he couldn't make any more corrections. He had it look in the way he remembered it, and he had good memory of it. Now, isn't that interesting? Look at that. Freak of nature. What a coincidence. What a coincidence. We're in a casino. I mean, it would make these guys balk at the odds of this happening. Isn't it amazing? Now, we also got some different artist conceptions of this. Believe it or not, I grew up with a guy named Kenny Bracey that looked a lot like this. He was an alcoholic. And this is Katie Lynn. She was an Oriental girl. She gave the Oriental cast to it because she said, well, look, the eyes. And I said, yeah, you're right. And she gave them nice, heavy lids because, to fit where they belong, they're going to need extra long lids. But I think she did a little better than Bill in that. But anyway, this is one by Mark Savy, and I always liked this one a lot. This was my favorite for a long time. And I met Mark here at the different conference that I was at, and he said, I'm a good artist. I'm going to draw your skull for you, and he did. I really liked that. I always thought that the chin was too heavy, that the lower face was too heavy, and of course he didn't account for the dent in the skull, but he was doing it from memory when he left. But I liked the look of it, the effort that he made. But then I got one from a guy named Rob Roy Menzies in Alaska. And Rob Roy sent me this. He said, I took your x-ray and I just built the face down on it based on what I know of anatomy and how I think it would look. And I said, that looks pretty good. Could you give me that fleshed out looking like a real thing? He said, yeah. So he sent me this one on the left here. And I said, well, it's pretty good, Rob Roy, but could you send me something that looks a little less constipated maybe? And so he says, well, yeah, I guess I could. And so he sent me this, and I think that's a pretty good depiction because this really does look bad, doesn't it? Doesn't he look in pain? Anyway, so this is the image that we're going with now. We think it's pretty good. Now, you look at that image and you say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't look like the grays that we know, that we're familiar with, because why? The prototypical gray is this image right here. Where? Does anybody recognize that image? The cover of Communion, the book by Whitley Strieber, right? Did you know I contacted Whitley to try to get the permission to use that image on the cover? He says, oh, you can't do that. That guy will not let that image go to anybody for anything. When we made the movie, he wouldn't let it go. I had never heard of such a thing. One of the most famous images in the world, and the guy that did it won't let it be reproduced. So you have to Whitley said, just have some artist friend you have reproduce it and it'll be okay. So I asked Rob Roy to do it, and this is what he cranked out. But the point is that there is an interesting anecdote that Bud Hopkins wrote about in a recent MUFON journal this past year. He says that when this came out, even Whitley knew this isn't how they really look. The artist that was chosen by the book company, he just made this kind of ominous, threatening thing that would sell books. And that cover sold books. So they made a good decision there. But this isn't the way abductees describe them. They describe them exactly the opposite. Small lower face, large upper head. And so, but Bud Hopkins and others, Bud says, began to use this as a litmus test. They would say to people who claim to be abductees, does this look like what you saw? And if they would say yes, he would know he's pretty much wasting his time. But if he'd show them this and they'd say, no, that really doesn't look, mine was different, then he knew that he was probably dealing with somebody that had a legitimate story to tell. The litmus test, that's what that is. Isn't that interesting? Little sidebar. Anyway, now we are stuck. We're back to being stuck What do? Well, we wait our 3 to 5 years. There's really nothing else to do. So in 2004, when I was in London, this young Australian dental technician, law school student comes over for her summer vacation to work. That would be Amy. And Amy, would you stand up just so everybody hopefully can see you? This is the person you want to look to tomorrow for the information I'm going to be telling you about in a minute. But anyway, we got together, and Belinda and I could see that we had developed a relationship and then a partnership. And so I said, there's really nothing for me to do. I should go back to the States and write a book about this, and we have to wait until the development comes in, and maybe the book will sell a little bit and we can make some money and we can stop living out of your pocket. And she was all for that. So we came back here to Florida, moved in, and I wrote the book and got on it. So lo and behold, as we're trying to sell it last year, who do you think I sent it to first? Whitley Strieber's agent, Russell Galen. Russ Galen is one of the top 5 agents in New York if he's not the first. And he doesn't normally handle books out of our field, but Whitley had seen The Starchild very early in 1999. And I said, you check with Whitley. He'll tell you this is the real deal. He says, human-alien hybrid, I am not interested in. I said, ought to talk to Whitley. So he agreed to take a look at it. He contacted me a few weeks later and he said, Lloyd, that's a really good book. I read about 200 pages of the manuscript. There's about 120 pages in a book. And he said, I'd really like to read to see how it turns out, but I'd be wasting my time. There's not a New York publisher that's going to take you seriously. Nobody's going to believe this. You're wasting your time trying to go that route. So I was trying to avoid, by going to a New York publisher, I was trying to avoid self-publishing because I'd already been through it with Everything You Know Is Wrong, and I did it successfully, as many of you know, and it's much easier now than it was 10 years ago. But I didn't want to do that if I could help it. But I couldn't help it because, I was hearing it from the horse's mouth. So I decided to self-publish, and we started down that road, and guess what? Just almost within a few weeks of this conversation with Russ Galen, guess what? 454 Life Sciences and Max Planck Institute to sequence Neanderthal genome. And you don't have to read it. I'm just going to tell you what it says in a nutshell. This new company called 454 Life Sciences has created a way to sequence DNA, nuclear DNA, of anything on a base pair by base pair basis. So remember the 16,000 base pairs floating around in the mitochondrial DNA? You notice I didn't say how many are in the nucleus because the number will blow you out. 3 billion base pairs. 3 billion base pairs. Do you remember a few years ago they were talking about sequencing the human genome, and we're going to do it, and we're going to do it over a few years, and 10 years, and they did it. They did it. All 3 billion base pairs, they did it. 3 billion, it's a huge number. Well, this is what 454 allows, the sequencing of DNA on a base by pair basis. No more primers. Touchdown! No more primers. We can find out exactly what the Starchild's mother and its father's DNA look like. The whole package, every gene, down to the base pairs, and can compare them one by one against humans, against Neanderthals, against anything. Because we're going to have the Neanderthal genome in 2 years. At the end of 2008, we're going to have the Neanderthal genome. And guess what else we're going to have in 2008? A line of people wanting to use this technology. You know who's going to be number 2 in that line? No, Otzi. Otzi. The Iceman found under the Alps. The Starchild's not going to be on the list. It's not an answer they want. It's not an answer anybody wants. The only way the Starchild is going to be on that list is if you and literally millions of others like you force it down their throats, force a way to get the Starchild on the list to have this technology run on it. And to that end, Amy and I are bringing out the book, The Starchild Skull, Genetic Enigma or Human-Alien Hybrid, and this is the cover of it. And as you see, it goes skull, 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 picture. Now, what's special about this is the collector's edition. You are seeing this for the first time, anybody anywhere. I'm going to reveal this also and make this offer also on the Coast to Coast show Monday night. But you get first crack. And what this is the collector's edition is a special thing that usually comes out after a book or a movie or something is special, and they know it is, and you'll see collector edition DVDs all the time, and occasionally you'll see collector's edition books. You never see, that I'm aware of, a collector's edition come out before the first edition. Understand how publishing works. You need a long lead time, months, before you can come out with your first edition. So our first edition is going to come out officially July 7th of this year, 2007, July 7th. Why July 7th? The 60th anniversary of the crash of Roswell. So we will have a lot of publicity about that, and we're negotiating right now with the Roswell people to be a part of that. Okay? So that's the official pub date, when normal people can buy the first edition of the book, and there's first edition, second edition, third edition. The collector's edition is very, very special in that we're going to offer it in the month of March only. Now, we were going to start taking them on March 1st because we thought we were going to be with the Coast to Coast thing on March 1st, but the best thing they could do for me was March 5th, so it's going to start there. But it doesn't matter. It's starting, and it's the month of March. You can buy this collector's edition of the book, which will be different from the regular edition. In the regular edition, this wording is going to be over here. This skull will be here. The light will shine here. The earth will be here. It'll be reversed, and there will be no collector's edition. Okay? Inside, there's going to be an in memoriam page to make it special to our group. In memoriam to Terry Brown. Now, it will be the same book, though, basically otherwise. 300 plus pages, 64 color slides, shots, mostly what you've seen here and a few others. It's going to be an absolutely first-rate book, a hardback, dust cover, as good as we can make it. As good as we can make it. And we're going to take orders for the month of March. And however many orders that is, whether it's 500, whether it's 5,000, it doesn't matter. However many there are, we will drop the gate at the end of March, and that'll be it, and we will order them to be printed during the month of April. It takes a little while to print them. And in the month of May, they will come back to us, and we will ship them out to you, whoever orders them. And by May, 2 months before anyone else can get it, the regular way, you will have the book in your hands. That is not what is most important about it. What is most important about it is we are going to be able eventually to get the 454 science technology to work on this skull. If we raise enough of a ruckus, if enough of these books sell and get into enough hands, mainstream media has to take notice. They have to pay attention. And you know, like this big documentary that's coming up this coming Sunday about the tomb of Jesus, which was found like 20 years ago? And it took that long to get James Cameron involved so that the media had to pay attention. Somebody, if we make enough noise with this book, somebody like James Cameron or like George Lucas or somebody will pay attention, and we'll take it on, and you will see it having as much publicity as the tomb of Jesus is supposedly now. Is everybody with me on that? So if you buy this book, which is, by the way, going to cost $30 per copy, $5 shipping, no matter how many copies you order, to the same address. One copy, $5 shipping, $30, $5 shipping. 5 copies, shipped to the same address, $5 shipping. $10 shipped to the same address, $5 shipping. Everybody understand? It's a good deal. Here's why it's a good deal. If you just buy it, read it, put it on your shelf, and leave it there for 2 or 3 years, my geneticist has told me that we should have an answer. If we can do what we got to do, we should have the answer in 2010 sometime. Because again, it takes a long time to sequence 3 billion base pairs. It's taken 2 years for the Neanderthal, and it'll take, he says there'll be improvements, as there always are, but it will take a year or more to do it. But if we get in the queue and force our way in around 209, which we can do, 210, we've got an answer. If the answer comes in, what I think I've given you enough evidence to indicate that it's going to be not entirely human, it's going to be other than 100% human, your book, your collector's edition of this book, which, by the way, will be signed, autographed by me, not inscribed to you, signed by me with a handwritten number in it. That book will have value, folks, real value to collectors, because it will be a finite number, whatever that finite number is. Get one for your kids. Get one for your grandkids. 10, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, you can put them through college. No, I'm serious. I am serious. That is what this has the potential to do. That is why you're seeing a collector's edition offered before the book is even published. I can guarantee you, I've been writing for 30 years, it's a well-written book. You won't have a problem there. I can guarantee you it's going to look absolutely A+. Worth your money now, and it can pay for itself easily. Even if it doesn't, even if we don't get the result we want, it's still a collector's edition. It's still special. It will still be worth more than you paid for it, I guarantee you, even if we don't get the result that we wanted. The first Mickey Mantle gum card, baseball card, goes for what, $30,000 now? Nobody knew who Mickey Mantle was going to be, or any of those guys. It's like a bubblegum card in a way. You pay a little bit in the beginning and you just watch it grow because there's a finite number. That's what a collector's edition is. I urge you to do that. Tomorrow, Amy and I are going to be in the vendor's room at a table. We will take orders now. After this, right now, after this, we're going to go over there through the dinner hour from 5:30 to 7, and we're going to be there for anybody that wants to come order, see the skulls, do whatever, or wait until tomorrow. There's no rush at all. Go get something to eat. But we want to give you the option. We will come then we will go eat, and then we will come then to the Meet the Speakers party a little later. But we're going to have something for you there too. Something there that Amy's cooked up. She's a whiz, let me tell you. She really is. And to answer the question of those of you who are thinking that she looks about half my age, you're wrong. She's less than half my age. But she's wonderful. She's the equivalent of hitting the lotto in life. She really is. Very, very lucky. Love her to death. All right, it says I have 2 minutes remaining. That's not going to leave time for Q&A, and I'm sorry for that, but I hope that you've gotten enough information where you don't have too many Q&As. I tried to cover it as best I could in the time that I was allotted, and I hope that you have been able to come away from it with at least a good knowledge base, but I also hope that you will seriously consider, I think we're going to do okay with this book. I don't need each of you to do it. I hope you all do it. I hope you all take advantage of the opportunity, because this is going to be a home run, folks. I really do. Or better yet, touchdown. Thank you.